to have our title panel now, and that will be a discussion led by Taline. And then we will have our Mike Perry and Anthony Santillo. So Taline, take it away.
Good morning, everybody. Again, hi. So I'm the moderator today for the affiliate panel, part 2. We have 2 panelists today. We have Mike Perry from Fidelity Title and my other partner, Anthony Santillo from Chicago Title. So we're going to talk about easements and encroachments. Very, very interesting topics that we have, and you don't want to miss out. So I'm going to start with Anthony, and he's going to explain the difference between easements and encroachment. Go ahead, Anthony.
Good morning, everybody. Basically, easements and encroachments, they're both the use of someone else's land. The difference is an easement is you've got a right to utilizing a portion of the land. And encroachment is basically you're using a piece of someone else's property without their right, their knowledge, consent. So basically you're trespassing on someone else's lot without them knowing about it. So this becomes a big issue as we're going to kind of go through how to clear up some of these items. And you know, most of the properties out there, you're always going to see an easement, which is usually a utility easement. You know, you've got your telephone poles running behind the property, and they've got a 5-foot easement across the rear of the property, or you've got a flag lot, and there's an easement for ingress and egress over that driveway getting to and from the property. So these are rights that have been insured, and it runs with the property that, you know, it's going to be showing on there. Where we run into a problem with someone's encroaching on someone else's property, and most of the time it comes up where the neighbor's fence is sitting 6 inches or 6 feet onto our property, and that's when it comes up. And I know Mike's got some discussion. We're going to kind of give you some of our scenarios we've had in the past on this, and how to clear up some of these items, and how some of these encroachments can be cured and not have to kill your deal like it does sometimes, where they say it's encroaching and now the lender has a major problem because we've shown an encroachment on there. But Mike, go ahead, and why don't you take over and talk about some of those issues, and we'll talk about clearing up some of the encroachment issues after.
Thank you, Anthony. One thing I want to mention, I get asked a lot, Mike, can you tell me all the easements on this property I'm about to list? Easements are recorded against the subject property that they're burdening usually, so they don't always show up. If you're the one that's benefiting from the easement, you'll see it in your legal description on a grant deed on a profile. Like you'll pull a profile and you can see the easement where they're benefiting from somebody else's. It usually shows on the legal description as a parcel to easement for whatever purpose, right? If it's burdening the property, you won't see it on the grant deed. Where you'll see it is in a title prelim as a Schedule B exception. And so a lot of times when you're searching for an easement that benefits your property, you won't see it on your chain of title. It will be against the chain of title where it's burdening it. And then one of the other things people always ask, well, I have prescriptive rights because I've been using this property for 5 years. My fence has been here for 20 years. Prescriptive rights, prescriptive easements are not automatic. You have to sue for them or get somebody to just agree, and then they sign, you know, agree to execute an easement deed. But that's often people think that just because they've been using it or the fence has been there, if it's not open and notorious, and those are the key words for prescriptive rights, you have to be open and notorious, like waving at the other owner as you drive through his driveway every day. Go, hey, how you doing? For over 5 years in California, 5 years here. So they're not automatic. So you can't just assume you have prescriptive rights because you've been doing it. And fences are not always an easy win for prescriptive rights because fences can be easily moved, and people didn't know where the lines were. They put the fence in the wrong place. That's not open and notorious because they didn't really know what they were doing. So that's the thing about prescriptive easements. And abandoning is the same thing. Abandoning an easement by not using it, you still have to record something to make it go away.
Yeah, that brings up a good point too, Mike, about we have a lot of times we'll have old easements from the 1930s prior to the land being subdivided, and they're showing a 1930s utility easement for a telephone company. It may be there, it may not, and they're saying, well, we'd like to have that removed. Well, really the only way to get rid of an easement is whoever's got the right to it's got to deed it back to the owner. So it runs with the land basically. I mean, you know, you got your new utility companies that come, you know, some people kind of freak out about saying, hey, well, we want this thing out of here, it doesn't belong. Well, the only way to really get rid of it is going back to that company. It may no longer be there. It's a lot of work for something that really has no bearing on the property. It may show on title, but it's not going to really have any effect on them. And that does come up with some of the issues about the easements that are coming through where they're actually recorded. Now, everyone knows we all get the homeowner's policy of title insurance now, which covers unrecorded easements. So there could be easements on there that are unrecorded. You've got coverage under the homeowner's policy. Where we've seen issues come up, we had one that was in La Cañada a few years back where there was an actual recorded easement for a gas line running through the property. Well, you know, they missed it. Title company didn't show it on their policy. They went to put a swimming pool in, found a gas line running through the back of, the back part of the property, which had the title company ended up having to pay to relocate that gas line around the perimeter. Now, had it been a CLTA policy, the title company would have had, even though it was recorded, they still would have had a responsibility to do it. But let's say there was a gas line running through the property, it was not recorded. Your client wants to go put a pool in and finds out that there's a gas line running through it. Well, now the title company potentially have some liability on there because we're covering unrecorded easements too. So if there is someone else has a right going through there, the title company may have to pay to relocate that gas line around the perimeter of the property. And, some people kind of freak out about easements, which, like I said, most properties out there have some sort of easement on there. Where we come into a lot of problems is where, and I'm kind of going through a scenario where you've got a client that says, hey, Anthony, we'd like to have your title company do an inspection. Now, it's not as people think we're doing a survey. We're not a survey company. We don't do surveys. We send a third party out there just to kind of go out there and eyeball it. Now they go out there and look at it and they kind of look at the property line and they see where the fences are. And all of a sudden it looks like the neighbor's garage is 2 feet on our property line. Okay, so now they're going to send out a report to us saying that there appears to be an encroachment of approximately 24 inches of the neighboring garage onto the property. Okay, so now we've got an issue. We've got an encroachment issue. Well, this is going to be something that's going to pop up and lender's going to freak out about it. Buyer's going to freak. If they were to fight and go to court over trying to remove that garage, the courts are not going to have somebody move their garage 2 feet or cut 2 feet off of the garage. It's not going to happen. So you'd end up having to go through court in order to get them to grant an easement to the neighbor because it's pre-existing. That's one of those ones Mike was talking about, getting a prescriptive easement. Thing's been there for 50 years, it's not going anywhere. They're not going to make you move your garage 2 feet off your property. So granting an easement would cure that. Now, if your buyer goes up there and you look at it and you kind of guess or they disclose, hey, the neighbor's garage is 2 feet on our property or our garage is 2 feet on the neighbor's property. And you let us know that, we report it, it's now an encroachment. Prelim goes out stating that there's encroachment, you're going to have a lender problem. If it's been disclosed to the parties and everyone's aware of it and they're willing to accept it, don't tell us about it. Once we have knowledge of it, we have to disclose it. If they know about it, they can't come back and sue the title company because they had knowledge. They have their option to cancel and back out. When they see the disclosure and say, hey, the neighbor's garage is 2 feet on your property, does it really matter? Well, we want them to move it. Well, that's not going to happen. So either you're going to take it as it is or not. If you bring us into the picture and we disclose it, now everyone's on knowledge of it. Now you're going to have a problem. You're not going to get financed. Well, most lenders are not going to finance it without that encroachment being addressed. So there are ways of curing it, which is, if say the neighbor is, encroaching on our property, we grant them an easement for the existing encroachment, problem solved. There's no longer encroachment because now they have been given the right to have that encroachment. Once you grant an easement, it gets rid of the encroachment. So that's how we can cure them is we've had it where, I remember a story years ago, excuse me, the neighbor's eaves of their garage were encroaching 2 feet onto the property line. Well, we have an encroachment issue. Well, what they did, they had a sawzall, cut the roof encroachment off, problem solved, no longer an encroachment, it's no longer there. So there are ways of curing these problems that aren't that bad. And I mean, Mike and I have both been doing this for a long time. So we've probably seen every story out there and how to cure some of this stuff. So.
Anthony, Mike, do you want to let them know about the plotted easements, and then we'll stop there and we'll take Q&A from the audience.
Well, yes, I'd love to, but I also want to mention that a lot of easements don't have obsolescence clauses, and that's why they have to stick, even if they're from 1914 water right easements in Tahunga. A lot of properties in northern Tahunga are hit by this water right easement where there was a Tujunga River, spelled T-A, one word, Junga, and that river ceased to exist, and now it's the wash where the golf course is once they built a dam in 1939. So you'll see these easements that talk about water rights, conduits running through, and they're blanket easements. They don't describe where they are, but they're pretty funny because when you're reading them, it's like talking about how many sheep you can water with your rights to the water to this easement that was running from the Tonga River. And people go, can you take that off the prelim? Because it definitely doesn't affect the property more. Well, if it doesn't have an obsolescence clause that says it's by this date, we don't need it anymore. If that's not in the document, we have to show it. And it's just an interesting read sometimes when you see these handwritten old easements. And then the other thing, to prevent encroachments when you're doing new construction or putting up a fence, it's always a smart thing to go spend the money and get a survey. Don't just put up a fence because you think you know where the line is. Sometimes you'll find a little tack in the sidewalk that has a little nail in it, a washer and a nail. That's the survey tack, and that's usually a corner of the lot. And so if you see that, at least you'll have an idea where your corner is, you know, where the line starts. So if you're going to do any kind of new construction, prevent going over the neighbor's property by getting the survey first. Plotted easements, right? And almost all prelims going out now, where the title companies, especially I know Chicago and Fidelity, when we issue them, they come with plotted easement maps. Not always right at the beginning, because some of those old documents take us a while to find, sometimes a day or two. And then they'll draw little color markings of where the easements are that are affecting your property, on both the ones that benefit you and the ones that are burdening your property.
That's it.
One of the other things too, as Mike was saying, when we get the plotted easements, a lot of times you'll see a box and it'll have just white and it'll say blanket in nature, unplottable, because there's no description of it. Remember, when you're looking at where it may have been a 4-acre parcel was split into 2 acres, and then those lots were also split. So you got portionalized land and there's no description. It's running somewhere on the land, but we can't tell where it is. So we can't, there's no way to plot that. They want to know where this easement for the water rights are. We can't tell you. There's no description of where it runs. So it's blanket in nature. It's not plottable. So when they're asking for plotted easements, a lot of times they'll come back and say the easements are not plottable because there is no description. So you're not going to be getting anything on that part. But they do come out generally 2 days after the prelim comes out. You're going to get your plotted easements, and our engineering companies do a great job with that. And if you have questions or anything, just feel free to give us a call. We'll run over it, whether it's our prelims or someone else. So just kind of run through the gamut with you on what's going to really have a major effect and things you're not going to really have to worry about.
Thanks, you guys. So going back, anybody wants to ask any extra questions for our panelists?
Hi, Rob, and then Carmen Aram, I think.
Thanks, Rick. So I have a couple of questions. The first one is there a time limit in which you can bring an action against a title company? And the second question is, can you talk about reserved easements and what the implications are on a deal?
Sure. Well, there's really not the time limit on filing a claim on a title company. Whenever it was insured last, as long as they have not transferred title to another third party, that they're still got their title insurance is still active. And then in regards to a reservation of an easement, I've got one of those going right now where you've got the person, they reserve the easement, but to perfect it, you've got to create a deed deeding that easement to the neighbor. So you reserved it, but now to perfect it, you've got to now grant that easement to the person. And this happens a lot. We see a development where you see a guy put in, like a flag lot. They built 3 houses, and the first time they did it, they gave it parcel 1 is the legal description, parcel 2 is the easement for ingress and egress. Second one is done. The third one, they reserved it. They never granted the easement to the new buyer, reserving it on the other 2 parcels. Now all of a sudden it looks like we have no access. So you've always got to perfect it by granting that easement. You may reserve it, but to perfect it, you've got to actually grant that easement to complete it.
Right. And when you're reserving it is usually when you own like 2 parcels, as Anthony's saying, 2 or 3 parcels, and you're deeding one parcel out, but you want to keep a right to use 10 feet of the property you're deeding out. That's why you reserve for yourself. Reserve for the grantor what easterly 10 feet say over the property they're selling first. And then when they sell the second property, they have to make sure, like Anthony says, to put that in the parcel 2 legal description that shows on the grantee to perpetuate it. Very important.
Thank you, Mike. Carmen.
Yes, in the event that there are 2 neighbors and they have a mutual agreement that one neighbor grants an easement, if you will, to the other one, and it's done in writing between the 2 parties, And let's say that they each respectively sells their home and they go somewhere else. Now, the new buyers of the homes, do they still have that agreement in place? Does that still work? Or do they have to sign a new agreement, come to an agreement on the easement? What happens there?
Well, there's two ways. You can either, what they should have done really is to record a reciprocal easement, each one granting each other an easement for that area, because what you have right now is an agreement between two parties. If you want to make it actually illegal and standing under their title, you would each grant each other, I'm going to grant you 10 feet to use my driveway. And you're going to then in, retrospect, grant me 10 feet. So now we've got a 20-foot driveway that we share. We both have a right to utilizing it. And then we put our terms in there that it's only for ingress and egress and not blocking or parking it and so forth. Because an agreement, they would have a duty, number one, to disclose that under their disclosure that there's an agreement, but it's not recorded. A new buyer comes in, they may not agree to doing that. Now, all of a sudden, you don't really have the right to utilizing that shared common area.
Okay.
It then becomes an encroachment issue. That becomes the
Right.
encroachment.
Right. Thank you.
Right, any other questions? Taline?
Nope, that's it. So I just wanted to say if there's no more questions, then we're done. Thank you so much for joining.
Back to Sabrina.